You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow, and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
In this chilling, true-style horror story from Soul Studios, an antique doll collector begins noticing strange disturbances in her home, objects out of place, doors unlocked, and an unsettling sense that she's being watched. When she installs a surveillance camera to catch the culprit, what she discovers on the footage will haunt her forever. Told in immersive first-person narration, The Doll's Eye View delivers a slow-burning descent into paranoia, supernatural terror, and one of the most disturbing twists you'll ever hear. If you love bone-chilling horror stories that feel real, the kind you replay in your mind at 3 a.m., hit subscribe to Soul Studios. We tell the stories you were never meant to hear, and the next one might already be watching you.
I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. The grainy footage on my laptop screen flickered with muted shades of grey as I clicked rewind for the 3rd time. There, in the corner of the frame, was my favourite antique doll perched on its shelf, and it was moving. Not jerking or falling like an object might during an earthquake, but moving, slowly twisting its porcelain head to follow me as I walked through the living room. And just behind the doll, barely visible in the shadows, stood a translucent woman with hollow eyes, her head and limbs mimicking my every move in eerie synchronization, like a puppeteer controlling an invisible marionette. I felt my blood run cold, and a numb, weightless sensation filled my chest. This had to be a nightmare, or a trick of the light, or a glitch in the camera feed. Something. Because the alternative meant that for weeks I had not been alone in my own home, and that the subtle oddities I'd tried so hard to ignore were far more sinister than a simple case of forgetfulness. I blinked hard at the screen, hoping the bizarre tableau would vanish upon a 4th viewing, but the scene remained the same. The doll's glassy eyes tracking my oblivious figure, and that gaunt, spectral woman looming behind it, moving when I moved, mocking me from the darkness. I need to back up and explain how it came to this. As unbelievable as that footage is, it didn't all happen at once. It was a slow, creeping terror that built up over months, a series of small moments and doubts that I brushed aside until I could no longer deny something was very wrong in my house. And the truth is, if I hadn't captured it on video, I might have convinced myself forever that it was all in my head. I've been collecting antique dolls for over 15 years. It started as a hobby after my grandmother passed away and left me her porcelain doll from 1890. A pretty little thing with curling auburn hair and painted blue eyes that seemed to follow you no matter where you stand. I fell in love with that doll's craftsmanship and the history it carried. Over the years, one doll became 5, then a dozen, until my home slowly filled with glassy-eyed Victorian children and delicate bisque faces frozen in faint smiles. I live alone in a creaky 2-story house built in the 1920s, a house that has its own quirks. The floorboards complain if you even breathe on them, and the wind likes to sneak in through ill-fitting windows to make the lights flicker at night. I'm used to the chorus of settling wood and groaning pipes. Those sounds were never what frightened me. In fact, I've never considered myself someone who scares easily. I've spent countless nights in dim antique shops and dusty estate sales searching for new additions to my doll collection, never once spooked by their lifelike eyes or the way their tiny fingers might rest unnaturally on a shelf. I know some people find dolls creepy, but to me, they were comforting in a strange way. Silent keepers of history, my little ceramic companions through lonely evenings. By last autumn, I had around 30 dolls displayed across the living room and upstairs study. Each sat or stood in its designated place. A 3-foot-tall petticoated doll named Beatrice guarded the entryway. A cluster of German bisque dolls from the 1900s occupied the china cabinet, and a half-dozen smaller dolls lounged in an old pram by the bay window. The house looked like a miniature Victorian playroom whenever twilight fell, and the dolls' shadows stretched long across the walls. I often would smile to myself at the sight. It was a bit surreal, perhaps, but it was mine, a personal museum of childhoods long past. So when odd things began happening, I was reluctant to blame my dolls. At first, I didn't think much of the little incidents. I'd come home from work and find a door unlocked that I swore I had locked in the morning, or a teacup moved from the kitchen table to the counter. Living alone, you become hyper-aware of your routines, and I always put my keys on the same hook by the door and my teacup in the sink. Still, I brushed it off as absent-mindedness. We all misplace things now and then, right? Then one night I was curled up on the couch under a quilt reading a novel when I heard a soft thump from the hallway. I sat up, heart skipping, and listened. Nothing. Probably a book sliding off the shelf in my study, I told myself, or the cat knocking something over. Except I didn't have a cat. With a sigh, I convinced myself I must have imagined it and tried to return to my reading. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It felt as though the dolls in the next room were listening, their painted ears perking up at my slightest movement. It was an absurd thought, and I banished it with a nervous laugh and a cup of chamomile tea. In the following weeks, the unexplained noises continued intermittently. I remember one particularly cold December evening. I was just drifting off in bed when I heard what sounded like the soft squeak of wheels rolling across hardwood. I sat up immediately, my pulse quickening. The only thing in the house with wheels was the old baby pram in the living room that held 6 of my dolls. Throwing on a robe, I padded down the stairs. The living room was still and dark, lit only by the orange glow of the street lamp outside. The pram was exactly where I'd left it by the window, its antique wheels locked in place. None of the dolls inside had shifted an inch. I exhaled, shakily laughing at myself. Maybe the sound had come from outside. A trash bin being dragged down the street, or a distant car with a squeaky axle. Yes, that had to be it. But as I turned to go back upstairs, I noticed something that made me pause. Beatrice, the 3-foot doll by the entryway, wasn't quite facing the door anymore. Her body and head were angled just slightly toward the living room, as if she had been watching me approach. I frowned and stepped closer. I never moved Beatrice from her spot. She's balanced perfectly against the wall in a little wooden stand. If it was bumped or moved, she would have toppled. Yet there she stood, upright and steady, just pivoted. I gently rotated her back to face the front door, muttering to myself that maybe a draft had shifted her heavy dress and caused the slight turn. Deep down, I knew that explanation was absurd. Beatrice weighs nearly 20 pounds, but I clung to it. I had to. The alternative was too unsettling, that someone or something had touched her. After that night, I started double-checking the locks more frequently. I even went so far as to test my windows, looking for any sign of forced entry. Nothing. Everything was normal, yet not normal. It's hard to explain the sense of atmosphere that had changed in my home. The air felt charged when the sun went down, like the hush before a thunderstorm. I found myself hesitating before entering dark rooms, a prickle on the back of my neck as though eyes were on me from the shadows. Of course, the only eyes in those shadows belonged to dolls, and they were just painted glass. They weren't really watching. Still, the rational part of my mind was losing ground to a creeping certainty. Something unseen had taken an interest in my collection, or in me. I began to have trouble sleeping. I'd wake up at odd hours, every hair on my arm standing on end, convinced I'd heard something. Sometimes it was a faint rustling, like a stiff silk dress brushing against a wall. Other times I swore I caught the tail end of a whisper, disappearing the instant I fully woke. I even started leaving a light on in the hallway, which I'd never done before. One night, I woke up to the pungent smell of roses saturating my bedroom. It was so strong it felt like I was sleeping in a garden. In the darkness, I could make out a shape on the dresser that didn't belong. One of my dolls, a little Victorian porcelain girl in a red velvet gown, was sitting right next to my perfume bottles. I had left her downstairs on a bookshelf with two other dolls. My mouth went dry. I definitely hadn't put her there. Had someone broken in? I listened intently for any sign of an intruder. Not a footstep, not a breath. The only sound was my own pounding heart and the distant ticking of the hall clock. Gathering courage, I crept over and grabbed the doll with trembling hands. Her glass eyes seemed to stare at me in accusatory silence. I practically flew down the steps and returned the doll to the bookshelf, half expecting to see a person hiding in the darkened living room. But it was empty. I barely slept the rest of that night, huddled under my covers with the bedroom door locked. By morning, I decided something had to be done. If I was dealing with a clever intruder, somehow slipping past my locks and moving things just to torment me, then I needed evidence for the police. And if it was something else, well, I needed to know that too. Either way, the uncertainty and dread gnawing at my sanity had become unbearable. The solution I landed on was to install a small security camera in the living room, one of those motion-activated smart cams that can record in the dark and send clips to your phone. I mounted it high on a bookshelf, overlooking the area with the pram, the entryway, and part of the hallway. If anyone was sneaking in at night to move things around, I'd catch them on tape. And if anything else was happening, at least I would have proof for myself that I wasn't losing my mind. Admittedly, I felt a little silly setting it up. Normal adults in their 30s don't sleep with one eye open because they're afraid their doll collection is coming to life. I half worried I was having some kind of stress-induced delusion. In fact, the morning after I found that doll on my dresser, I even scheduled a check-in with my doctor, who listened kindly and suggested it sounded like anxiety and maybe I should see a therapist. I didn't mention the word ghost. I wasn't that far gone. Not yet. The camera was a way to reassure myself that either nothing was wrong and I truly did need help, or that something tangible was happening that I could confront. The first few nights recorded nothing unusual. I'd wake up, check the footage over coffee, and see only the still life of my living room. Furniture in place, dolls silently occupying their spots, and me passing through on occasion. It became part of my routine. Every morning, I felt both eager and dread-filled as I opened the app to review the night's clips. For a while, I started to relax. Maybe whatever it was, intruder, spirit, or my own overactive imagination, had gone. Maybe acknowledging my fear had somehow broken the spell of it. For 2 full weeks, nothing happened. No thumps in the night, no misplaced items. I almost let myself believe the nightmare was over, but then, of course, it started again. It was a Tuesday when I noticed the first new notification on the camera app. Sometime around 2:30 a.m., the motion sensor had triggered. I tapped the clip to play it, nerves tingling. The video was dark and grainy in night vision mode, tinged green. For a few seconds, nothing moved. Then a split-second burst of static streaked across the image. The living room lights came on in the video. I could see the lamp by the couch suddenly illuminate, then immediately turn off, as if there had been a power surge. In those 2 seconds of light, nothing looked amiss. Except, I thought I saw a faint figure standing by the window. I replayed the clip, pausing on the bright flash frame by frame. There was a distortion near the window, a human-shaped blur that could have been a trick of the light. It was too indistinct to be sure. What was clear was that the lamp had turned on by itself. A chill ran through me. I hurried to the living room to check the lamp. It was switched to the off position. Perhaps a short circuit? I had never seen that lamp do that before, but I made a note to call an electrician. At the same time, I knew in my gut it wasn't a wiring issue. I felt sick with the return of dread. Reviewing the rest of that night's footage, I saw no further motion after the lights flickered. But I could no longer deny that something was again stirring in my home. The following night, I decided to stay up late with the camera feed open on my laptop in real time. If the motion alert went off, I wanted to see it for myself as it happened. I sat in bed with my back against the headboard, lights off, the bluish glow of the live feed painting my face. Midnight passed quietly. Around 1 a.m. I was fighting sleep, my eyelids heavy, when I heard a clatter from downstairs, the unmistakable sound of something falling to the floor. My screen hadn't yet flagged motion, so I watched intently. A moment later, there was a soft as the old floorboards in the living room registered some weight. The camera's motion icon blinked on, and the feed shifted ever so slightly, as if it too had heard the noise. On the video, I saw nothing at first. Then a shadow drifted across the far wall near the hallway entrance, as if someone had passed just out of the camera's view. My breath caught. I kept my eyes glued to the screen, heart hammering so loudly I was certain I'd missed something through the thudding in my ears. There, movement. One of the dolls in the pram, a blonde-haired doll in a white christening gown, had toppled out onto the floor. That must have been the clatter I heard, but dolls don't just fall by themselves, not from the middle of a deep pram. It was as if someone had plucked it up and dropped it, yet no one was there. I must have watched that clip a dozen times, long into the early morning hours, analysing every pixel of shadow. There was a point in the footage just after the doll fell where the camera's audio picked up a tiny... It was so faint I almost missed it. A brief, breathy sound that might have been my name, or maybe it was nothing but the power of suggestion. I was so wound up and sleep-deprived, I started to second-guess everything. The one thing I couldn't dismiss was the sight of that doll tumbling out of the carriage on its own. I retrieved the fallen doll the next day. It was one of the older ones, eyes made of glass that opened and closed depending on position. I could have sworn as I lifted her back into the pram that her eyes clicked shut just for a moment, as if she blinked at me. It sent a bolt of panic through my hands and I nearly dropped her. Sleep deprivation, I told myself. Just nerves. 2 nights later, just after 3 a.m., I was jarred awake by the sound of something shattering downstairs. It sounded like a glass object had exploded against a wall. My stomach lurched. This wasn't a subtle thump or a creak. This was loud. I grabbed my phone and opened the camera app in a panic. The live feed showed darkness, but I could vaguely see shards glinting on the floor near the china cabinet. My heart sank as I realized one of my display case doors was ajar. I had to go and see the damage. Clutching a baseball bat, a completely instinctual grab on my way out of bed, I crept down the staircase, the bat in one hand and my phone in the other, using its flashlight feature to light the way. Every step groaned under my weight, announcing my approach. I felt exposed like an intruder in my own home, inching toward an ambush. When I reached the living room, the air was frigid. I could see my breath clouding in front of me as I panned the weak phone light around. The cabinet's glass door had indeed swung open, and one of the glass shelves inside had shattered. Bits of glass littered the hardwood. Porcelain limbs and heads from the dolls that had been on that shelf poked out from the debris. My stomach twisted painfully at the sight of my treasured dolls broken. I forced myself to take a few steps inside, scanning the room. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling and thin. No answer. Only the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the adjacent kitchen and the thudding of my pulse in my ears. I knelt by the shattered cabinet, lowering the bat, and gingerly picked up the nearest doll's remains, an 1880s German figurine, now missing an eye. My vision blurred with tears of anger and fear. Who would do this? Why? A faint shuffle sounded behind me, like a foot dragging lightly. I spun around, raising the bat. The phone's light cut across the dim room, illuminating the couch, the pram, the doorway. Nothing. But as I passed the beam over the doll shelf by the entryway, I nearly dropped the phone. Beatrice, the tall doll, her face was different. From where I stood, it looked like she was smiling. A small, closed-mouth smile instead of the painted, neutral expression she'd always had.
Are you afraid of the dark?
I took a shaky step forward, squinting to see if it was a trick of shadow on her lips. Suddenly, a sharp series of taps rattled the glass right beside me, echoing in the stillness. I jerked back, swinging the phone light toward the sound. It had come from the window, 3 quick taps on the glass pane. Outside, only the empty street and swaying branches. The tapping must have been a tree branch, it had to be. My nerves were shot, every sound was amplified. When I turned back to look at Beatrice again, I felt a fresh jolt of terror. Her head was now subtly angled toward me. I was certain she had been facing forward just moments before. That was it. I couldn't stay down there any longer. Leaving the mess of glass, I backed away, never taking my eyes off that entryway doll, half expecting her to leap at me. Then I bolted upstairs to my bedroom, slammed the door and locked it. I didn't sleep. I sat in a corner of the room, clutching the bat, until dawn's first light crept under the door. With daylight came a shred of courage. Exhausted, I ventured back downstairs to clean up the wreckage. In the morning sun, the living room looked ordinary again, aside from the broken shelf and my poor dolls in pieces. Beatrice, of course, was facing the door as usual, her porcelain features as placid as ever, no hint of a smile. I almost convinced myself that I had imagined her changing expression in my panicked state. But the camera had recorded everything, and I knew I had to see it. I retrieved the memory card from the cam and loaded the footage onto my laptop, hands trembling as I navigated to the time of the incident. The video player opened, and I steeled myself, pressing play. On the screen, the living room appeared in ghostly night vision. There I was, stepping cautiously into view with my phone light and bat. I watched myself kneel by the shattered cabinet, watched the confusion and fear on my own face as I examined the broken pieces. I saw myself whip around at the faint sound behind me and scan the room. My eyes on the video were wide, stark white in the IR light. My past self had no idea what was happening just behind her. As the camera's perspective panned slightly, it had an auto-tracking feature that followed motion. It caught the doll shelf and entryway in frame. I leaned closer to the screen, pulse pounding. At first, all I saw were the rows of doll faces staring ahead. Then, a subtle motion. Beatrice's head turned a fraction, following me as I stepped toward the shelf. A choked sound escaped my throat as I watched the doll's painted eyes trail after my moving figure. And then she came into view. The translucent figure I'd only glimpsed before emerged behind the doll shelf, as if stepping through the wall itself. It was a woman, or the wraith of one, wearing a dark, old-fashioned dress. Her head cocked oddly to one side, and her eyes, they were empty, just dark pits in a pallid face. I felt a sickening mix of vindication and terror seeing her so clearly. The woman's lips were moving behind the glass of the cabinet, as if whispering something I couldn't hear. On the video, I saw myself shining the phone light around, oblivious as the ghostly woman stood, not 10 feet away. As I moved, the apparition moved too, mimicking my posture with grotesque exactness. When I crouched to pick up a doll, she crouched behind the shelf, limbs jerking in an uncanny puppet-like fashion. When I turned my head to scan the room, her head twisted the same way, a beat too late, as if she were learning the motions. The realization hit me like ice water. She was toying with me, using the dolls as her stage. I watched myself approach Beatrice. At that moment on screen, a blur passed by me. The ghost drifted swiftly from the cabinet to stand directly behind Beatrice. I hadn't seen it then, but the camera did. The spectre hovered there, and with one pale hand she stroked the doll's curls fondly before clasping both hands around either side of Beatrice's porcelain head. My stomach churned as I saw the doll's eyes flicker with life. Slowly, under those phantom hands, Beatrice's head swiveled to face the me on the video. The movement was so smooth, so deliberate. It was nothing mechanical or accidental. The doll was being turned as if it were alive. I bit down on my knuckle, watching myself on screen, finally noticed the tapping at the window. I jumped visibly when the ghost's face snapped toward the sound too. In the video, the instant I looked away toward the window, the ghostly woman peered out from behind the doll. Her hollow eyes locked onto my real-life back. She smiled then, an awful, dead smile, and began to raise her arms in tandem with mine. I felt bile rise in my throat as I saw the two of us in that frame. Me, a frightened woman, with a phone and bat, and behind Beatrice, this thing, lifting its arms in a macabre parody of my movements. I moved the phone to shine at the window. She moved her hand, miming my action, but instead of a phone, her fingers splayed out like crooked twigs. I took a step back. She shifted forward. It was like watching a demonic mirror. The clip ended as I fled upstairs. I hadn't even realized I'd been holding my breath until the video player blinked replay, and I gulped in air, lightheaded. That's when the full weight of what I'd seen and what it meant came crashing down. All those nights of feeling watched, the whispers, the movements. She had been there, watching me through the dolls. Perhaps controlling them, or using them as her eyes and ears, maybe even trying to find a way to control me. I slammed my laptop shut, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I didn't stay in the house after that. I grabbed a duffel bag of clothes and important documents and practically ran out the front door as soon as I'd finished watching the footage. For the next few nights, I crashed on a colleague's couch, too ashamed to explain the real reason beyond a vague home emergency. From the safety of someone else's living room, I considered my options. Burn the dolls? Call a priest? Try to reason with a ghost? Every idea felt ludicrous. In the end, I decided not to return home alone. A week later, I convinced a close friend, Mark, to come with me to the house in broad daylight. I hadn't told him everything, just that I thought someone had broken in and I needed backup. We entered nervously, calling out in case a squatter or vandal was hiding inside. The place was silent, exactly as I left it. The shattered cabinet was still there, the broken dolls lying in state on the shelf. A rancid, sweet smell hung in the air like overripe flowers gone to rot. Mark wrinkled his nose and joked, "You sure you didn't leave a Halloween pumpkin in here to ferment?" I forced a laugh. I didn't dare tell him that I'd smelled that same cloying rose scent the night I found the doll on my dresser. Together, we packed up every doll in the house into boxes. I handled them as little as possible, using gloves and telling myself over and over that they were just objects, just porcelain and cloth. Still, my skin crawled with each one I touched. It felt like I was boxing up dozens of eyes that I could not bear to meet. We loaded them into Mark's truck, and he helped me drop the collection off at a storage unit across town. I wasn't ready to destroy my lifetime hobby, but I knew I couldn't live with those dolls under the same roof anymore. That should have made me feel safer. It didn't. Even with the dolls gone, I couldn't bring myself to move back into the house. Little signs of her presence began to manifest no matter where I went. At my colleague's apartment, I'd wake up in a sweat, certain I heard the floorboards in the next room, or the faint glass tapping on the window, only to find nothing there. A light bulb burst in the bathroom while I was brushing my teeth, showering me in glass shards. In the cracked mirror, for just an instant, I thought I saw a pale figure standing behind me. When I whirled around, of course, I was alone, but I couldn't stop shaking for hours. I eventually showed the footage to Mark. I felt I owed him the truth after he'd helped me clean out the house. He watched it 3 times in silence. Then he deleted it, calmly ejecting the memory card and saying, "You need to let this go. Don't let her worm into your head." I wanted to scream at him because she was already in my head. In my head, in my house, in my life. But I understood he was terrified too, and deleting the video was his way of coping. It's been a month now. I'm staying in a new apartment on the other side of town. I haven't set foot back in that old house, and I put it up for sale. Part of me feels horribly guilty, like I'm releasing something evil into the world for someone else to stumble upon. Sometimes I think of going back and burning the place down with everything inside, but I suspect even that wouldn't stop her. If horror movies have taught me anything, vengeful spirits don't tend to respect eviction notices or arson. I keep wondering what she wanted. Why me? Was it the dolls that drew her, or was she there all along, waiting for someone like me to come along? I've done some digging into the history of the house and my collection. Through an old friend in the antique circle, I learned that the previous owner of my house was an elderly woman who had lived there for decades. And she was a doll collector too. She died in the house. They found her body in the living room, surrounded by dolls, some of which were later sold off. It's even possible one of the dolls I bought early on belonged to her. The details of her death are vague in the public record, but one article mentioned she had gouged out her own eyes before she died. They said she was suffering from dementia, hollow eyes. I don't know if that woman is the entity I've been dealing with, but the coincidence is chilling. I've since wondered if I inadvertently invited her by filling the home once again with the things she loved most in life. Maybe she was pleased at first, happy to have her dolls back, and then enraged when she realized I was an interloper playing with her children. Or maybe she needs a living puppet to enact whatever twisted play she's trapped in. I just don't know. What I do know is that I still don't feel alone. I haven't for a long time now. The other day, as I was sorting through boxes in my new apartment, I found something that made my heart stop. Tucked between two blankets was a single glass eye, the size of a marble, one from the doll that had shattered in the cabinet. I am certain I did not pack it. I held it up in the dim evening light, and as absurd as it may sound, I felt watched. That night, I dreamed of the hollow-eyed woman. I dreamed she was standing at the foot of my bed, tilting her head in that unnatural way, studying me. When I jerked awake, my apartment was completely dark. The power had gone out. I swear I could hear a whisper of someone softly laughing in the corners of my room, but I refused to light my flashlight and look. I'm not sure how to end this story because, for me, it hasn't truly ended. I'm sharing it here as a warning, or maybe just a cautionary tale. Sometimes the things we collect end up collecting us. I still glance over my shoulder when I'm home alone. I can't stand looking at mirrors at night, and I haven't dared to watch any more footage or set up any more cameras. Some things I've decided I would rather not see, because now I know when I feel that prickle on my neck or catch a whisper of roses in the air, it's not just my imagination. She's there, watching me, perhaps with that missing doll eye I found, seeing everything I do, waiting patiently for the moment I let my guard down. If you ever start to feel like something is watching you from the shadows, don't ignore it, because sometimes what's looking back isn't just your imagination, it's something far older and far closer than you think. And once it sees you, it never stops. The doll's eye view, when the watcher becomes the watched.
Every story has an end, but here the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week, so if you crave suspense, the unexplained and the downright chilling, make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.